Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Special Needs Trust and the return of the Medi-Cal asset limit, what families and advocates need to know. Our speaker today is Kevin Urbatsch with the Urbatsch Law Firm. Please note that all attendees will be muted. If you have a question, please send your question through the Zoom chat. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this very important presentation. We know there's a lot of anxiety right now with the return of the Medi-Cal asset limits in 2026. My name is Maura. I'm the Executive Director at California Advocates for Nursing Home Reform. We've been trying to host different events, webinars for both consumers and professionals who work in the Medi-Cal space. Just try to make sure that people are aware of all the options because there's still time before 2026, and as Kevin will get into in a little bit, even beyond the beginning of the year. But I just want to welcome our speaker today. Kevin is the principal of the special needs and settlement planning firm Urbatsch Law Firm in Berkeley, California. He is a nationally recognized expert in the unique planning needs of individuals with disabilities and their families. And he is a wonderful supporter of Canner and always willing to provide really high quality presentations. I just want to thank Kevin so much for his time and volunteering to give this presentation today. And I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Maura. So today we're going to talk a little bit about special needs planning for people with disabilities. And then we'll take a quick look at what that means with Medi-Cal reinstating their asset test. So what we're going to cover today is just a quick overview. What do we mean by special needs planning? And then when we get to special needs planning, the big distinction we draw is between first and third party planning, which really is a distinction between whose money are we planning for, the person with a disability or someone else's. Then we'll talk about how having money will impact the eligibility for public benefits for people with disabilities, and focus a bit on the Medi-Cal and what's going to happen with that asset test when it's reinstated. And what is that? Good Lord, 2 months? So we have 2 more months of blessed Medi-Cal free, no asset test, and then we go back to a rule where there is an asset test. I'm going to wrap it up with a little bit of best practices and how we manage special needs planning going forward after the asset test is reinstated. All right, what are we talking about? Special needs planning, what is that? Generally, what we do as special needs planners is we focus on preparing a plan for people with disabilities. We want to be sure that we're planning to enhance their quality of life for the rest of their life, generally through doing legal documents, helping them financially plan, and then what personal strategies we need to implement to make sure that they're protected for the rest of their life. Oftentimes when we do this planning, it's with parents coming in to plan for their children with disabilities. But in addition, we also plan for the individual with the disability themselves. Oftentimes they get money, either through a litigation recovery, an unexpected inheritance. And we have to decide, what are we going to do with this money for that person in order to preserve their benefits, make sure that we're enhancing their quality of life, and making sure that that money doesn't disqualify them from some much needed benefits. Part of what we do at our firm is make sure that, especially when we're dealing with a family, is to do a holistic special needs plan. We don't just focus on public benefits, but we're looking at care management, decision-making authority, and making sure that we're kind of replacing mom and dad who are doing a lot of that stuff for free. We need to make sure that we're fixing that plan and making sure the parents are replaced with a system that's basically replaceable and has a lot of checks and balances. So why do we do this planning? Well, without it, it could end up costing essential public benefits, which means there's probably not enough money for care. Kind of the big concern we have is money, because it does take a lot of money to care for anyone, regardless if they have a disability or not. And typically when we're talking disability in this sense, we're going under the federal government's definition of disability, which means a physical or mental impairment that will last for 12 months or longer, that prevents that person from going out and getting a job that basically earns a very minimal amount of money. So for people with that serious of a disability, understand that they probably will not be able to work and help supplement their own care needs. So we are really trying to find as many sources of revenue to help care for that person for the rest of their life. That usually means getting as much we can from the government, trying to get private resources and maximize those as much as we can for that lifetime care need. So really, without proper planning, that goes by the wayside. The money gets wasted quickly, paying for things that might be paid for by the government. With that proper planning, you're looking at hopefully stretching every dollar out to the maximum extent possible to enhance their quality of life. So we have kind of this chart about how do we achieve a successful special needs plan. And, I get focused on the legal planning because I'm an attorney. And we might work with special needs trusts, ABLE accounts, conservatorship, supported decision-making, etc. There's also a financial plan, and much like special needs planning, you really need to have someone who's versed in disability to be able to do an effective plan. So you want to find a financial planner who understands really it's almost like creating a retirement plan for an 18-year-old, because that person will not be able to earn typically, or if they can earn, it's usually at a much lower amount than person without a disability. In addition, we want to make sure there's a life care plan in place, because again, traditionally when I'm doing a plan, it's with mom and dad or grandparents or somebody helping that loved one with special needs. We want to make sure that when mom and dad are not there to take them to the doctor, to deal with their therapies, treatments, to help them advocate for their public benefits, that we have a plan in place. So it's more than legal planning and money planning, it's life planning. And we want to enhance that family and support network. A lot of families rely on siblings to step up and take over control. I have found in my experience that many siblings will do a lot, but it's hard for them to do everything because they have their own life, their own family, their own concerns. So sometimes they need help. And that's really what we're trying to do, is develop kind of a team that will take over and help that person with a disability through the rest of their life. We also want to focus on education, employment, and communication and decision making, which is a big deal, because if the person with a disability has capacity in some areas, we want to enhance that. We want to make sure they have as much independence as possible. So that's where we might look at powers of attorney, advanced healthcare directives. We might look at a supported decision-making arrangement. But if they just absolutely need the protection, then we're looking usually at a limited conservatorship for the developmentally disabled or a general conservatorship. So again, a special needs plan focuses on all of those things. And the tools we end up having to help this plan, usually the big one is the special needs trust. And those are broken up into first and third party special needs trusts. Those can be individual trusts, meaning there's one document prepared usually by an attorney, but there's forms out there that you can use. Nolo Press has a good third party SNT. I say that because my firm helped draft it. But there's also first party SNTs. There's also another group called pooled special needs trusts. Those are run by nonprofits. And generally what they do is they aggregate a bunch of money from a bunch of different people. They manage it all under a special needs trust. And again, it's used to enhance their quality of life. The benefit of special needs trusts is any asset held inside a properly drafted one is exempt, meaning it doesn't count against asset tests, which is kind of a way that we deal with asset tests. So when Medi-Cal reinstates their asset test, maybe a special needs trust is a solution. When we're helping plan for parents, usually what we're doing is a third party trust, we'll talk about in a second. But the document that I encourage families to prepare is the memorandum of intent. To me, that is the most important document that they can do and that they can prepare to assist that loved one with special needs. We've also had, I keep saying it's a recent development with an ABLE account, but now it's been around since I think 2014. Feels like that was only yesterday, but that was 11 years ago. So ABLE accounts are another tool for people with disabilities. They don't replace special needs trust, but a lot of times they work in tandem with them. And again, it's another great tool to enhance the quality of life of people with disabilities. And I'll go through kind of when and what we choose in different circumstances. And then finally, as I mentioned before, decision-making authority is a big deal. We have to make that decision of, is there going to be a conservatorship needed, supported decision-making, powers of attorney, etc. So these are the tools we have as planners. How do we choose which tool to use? So again, first party trust, that's when the person with the disability has their own money. That could have happened because they received an inheritance that was not planned for. Could be a litigation recovery. Maybe they became disabled because of an injury, or they were disabled and they just got hit by a car and now they have money. Or a lot of times we have mental illness where maybe that break didn't happen until they were in their late 20s, early 30s, and they had earned some money prior to that happening. And if they have money and they want to be eligible for public benefits, certain public benefits, they can put it into a first party SNT. Okay. We much prefer the third party SNT, but again, that can only be funded with anyone else's money other than the person with a disability. That's when we're doing mom and dad's estate plan, grandma and grandpa. Some people do like a GoFundMe and they direct all the money into a third party SNT. Everybody can use that third party SNT. We like it because it's a lot better for the family if we can flow it through there. But if it is the person's own money, the government requires it go into a first party SNT. And it does have some specific requirements. And here's what they are. So for an individual D4A special needs trust, the person has to be under age 65 to use that. It has to include a payback provision, and we'll talk about what that means. It must be used for the primary benefit. They say sole benefit, but the Social Security Administration has defined that to mean the primary benefit, meaning as long as distributions are made that enhances the quality of life of the person with a disability, if somebody else gets a derivative benefit from it, it's okay. Sometimes if the person doesn't have capacity, we have to go to court to get that set up. But otherwise, if the person has capacity, the individual can set up their own D4A, or a parent or grandparent or a legal representative like an agent under a power of attorney with proper authority in the power of attorney. Again, oftentimes when we're doing first party special needs trust, it's coming from PI settlements, med-mal settlements, unexpected inheritances, divorces. These are where first party SNTs are commonly used. And as I mentioned, also third party special needs trust, those are set up with other people's money. And so the government seems to like people to pre-plan for their loved one with special needs. So they make the rules pretty easy to follow, and they don't put as many restrictions on a third party trust than they do first party. The big one, there's no payback. And that means that on the death of the person with a disability, all the money in a third party trust can go to family, friends, wherever they want it to go. First party, we have to pay back Medi-Cal first, then we can send it off if there's anything left. There's no age restriction and can benefit multiple people. There's no primary benefit requirement. And again, it's oftentimes a very excellent tool for leaving an inheritance to a person with a disability, or maybe a GoFundMe or something like that. There's also the pooled special needs trust, which I mentioned. Again, it's run by a nonprofit. It is first party. They pool the money for investment purposes, but each person has a set aside account. There is a payback provision, but prior to that payback provision, the nonprofit can retain the funds. So a lot of pooled trusts will retain funds if Medi-Cal is going to take all of it. Or if they're not going to take all of it, they may not retain any funds, and Medi-Cal gets their payback, and then the rest goes to family or friends or the heirs. So these are the options, and many pooled trusts have both a first party and third party trust. So it kind of benefits people to use a pooled SNT, generally with assets that may not be sufficient to create their own trust. Also, the benefit of a pooled trust, is that nonprofit entity will have hopefully a lot of experience in administering trust. So we want to make sure that it is designed properly. And so the selection of, do you want a pooled trust or an individual trust, usually comes down to, do you have somebody that you can appoint as trustee of this trust? And is there enough money to really justify creating your own individual trust? As I mentioned, also, ABLE accounts are a wonderful tool. And currently, the person has to have been disabled before age 26 in order to use an ABLE account. That is going to change January 1st, 2026, so that people disabled before age 46 can then use an ABLE account. So what does this ABLE account do for a person with a disability? Well, it's designed very much similar to a 529 plan. If you're familiar with those are education plans. People put money in, it grows income tax free. You pay for qualified education expenses. It comes out income tax free. And it's a way to save for college. These are designed similar, and you can see the IRS code 529 capital A is what an ABLE account is, and it stands for Achieving a Better Life Experience. The assets in an ABLE account are exempt. If it does earn income, it's exempt for public benefit eligibility purposes. The one thing that we really love about ABLE accounts is if the person with a disability has the capacity to manage their own funds, they are in charge of their ABLE account. They can never be in charge of their own special needs trust, which is frustrating for many of our clients who are people with disabilities who maybe have a disability, but they otherwise have complete capacity to manage their life. An ABLE account is a way for them to take some ownership and control over their own assets. They're run by states. So California's program is CalABLE, CalABLE. You can Google it. Very simple to sign up. The limitations on this account: one, you can only fund it with the annual gift tax exemption amount, which in 2025 is $19,000. Now that's not 19,000 from multiple people. It's 19,000 total from all sources. Okay. Now, if the person with a disability does work, they can add their earnings up to a certain amount to that. But if they don't work, the maximum you can put in is 19,000. There can only be one ABLE account, so they can't do multiple accounts. It's just one. All the growth in that account is tax free. And if they make distributions for what they call qualified disability expenses, that I'll talk about next, then it comes out income tax free. If they do happen to make a distribution that doesn't meet a qualified disability expense, it comes out with income plus a 10% penalty. But as we'll see in just a minute, we've had a very difficult time coming up with something that is not a QDE or a qualified disability expense. So this account then can grow up to $100,000 for SSI, or supplemental security income, which normally just has a $2,000 resource limit. So it greatly expands how much money that person with a disability can have and still maintain eligibility for SSI. If they're Medi-Cal only, currently, as we know, Medi-Cal has no asset test, so it doesn't matter. But beginning next year, the asset test is $130,000 for an individual. An ABLE account can hold up to $529,000 before it starts counting against that $130,000. So you can see you can have quite a bit of money in an ABLE account and preserve eligibility for Medi-Cal even when the asset test is reinstated. You can move from one ABLE account to another, but generally CalABLE has a benefit that no other ABLE program has for Californians, and that is there is a payback on death. So if that person with a disability dies, the rules say that they have to pay back Medi-Cal for any services they received from the time that the ABLE account was opened. But California has passed a law that says they are not instituting a payback as long as the assets are held in CalABLE. There was a grandfather clause for people who signed up for other states' ABLE programs, but after this law was passed, I think 1 or 2 years ago, they will go after if other states able program money on the death of the person, but CalABLE will remain exempt. Okay. So if you're advising clients or advising people, or you yourself are considering an ABLE account, I strongly recommend California use CalABLE. Here's some examples of qualified expenses. Understand that 529, our ABLE account, basically the IRS controls the rules. Normally, we're dealing with Social Security Administration or the Department of Healthcare Services, and a lot of times they can be awfully strict with our people with disabilities. Most of the time, my colleagues who do estate planning have all these issues with the IRS. I'm thrilled with what the IRS did here. They are very expansive in their definition of qualified disability expenses. Basic living expenses, housing, rent, transportation, health, wellness. Like I said, it's almost impossible to come up with a distribution that would not be considered a qualified disability expense for a person with a disability. So again, these are extremely broadly defined. I like video game for exercise. Yeah, good. I've never thought of video gaming as an exercise, but if you spend money out of your ABLE account for video games, absolutely a qualified disability expense. I think we tried to come up with one, and I think we said maybe unpaid illegal gambling debts. That might not be a qualified disability expense. I don't know. I have not heard of the IRS challenging a single one of these anywhere in the country. So if that ever does happen to you, please let me know. I'd love to hear about it. And again, also the expenses do not need to solely benefit the person with a disability, which means if it's in a special needs trust, a first party special needs trust, that person with a disability can't use the money in that trust, say, to buy a birthday present or to donate to charity or a church. But if they have an ABLE account, they're allowed to use that money that way. And again, they can use that as kind of a way to control their own funds. So it's a really great account if they qualify. And as I said, beginning next year, if you were disabled before age 46, you can now use that account. Right now it's 26. And so we have plenty of people using it now. It doesn't mean you have to set it up before then. It just means you have to have been disabled before then. Okay. Now, I mentioned before that when I'm doing third-party planning for mom and dad or somebody like that, the memorandum of intent to me is the most important document that they can do. And that is because mom and dad do so much for that loved one with special needs. No one knows more. And when they're gone, we lose that. We lose all their information. They know the doctors that they like, the therapies to go to. They know the things that don't work, the things they like, the things they don't like. And so we need to get that on paper. And it gives guidance to the trustee, trust advisory committee, everybody, caregivers. It is an essential document. And it's something that I tell my clients, what you do is create one, and then maybe on that person's birthday, pull it out and update it and keep it current because things change. And we want to make sure that when you're gone, that you still have a voice. And this is your voice, is the memorandum of intent. Now, I gave that speech for many years to my clients, and they all agreed with me at the meeting that this was an important thing to do, but it's hard. And a lot of times they wouldn't do it. So my wife and I came up with a program. It's complimentary workshop, 1 hour. So you can use your QR code on this, and hopefully you'll have a handout with a slide that gives you access. It's a 1 hour workshop on how to prepare a memorandum of intent. There are sample forms in there, like 3 different kinds, and it'll get you started. And it'll talk about the things you should consider in putting in one. So I think even if you don't do anything else, getting a memo of intent in place is very helpful. It's not a legally binding document, but it does express your intent for how you'd like to, the money you've left for your loved one with special needs, how it's used to enhance their quality of life, and what you envision that person's quality of life being. And again, it's a wonderful document. So I'm going to stop beating that dead horse, but it is, again, critical. So let's shift gears and talk about public benefits. And as I mentioned at the outset here, public benefits are critical. because people with disabilities, under the definition of the federal government, are people who are not able to work and earn a living. And that means that they're going to live their lives with very little income that they have generated themselves. That means that whatever's left to them by family or friends and the government, that's what they have. And so we don't want any revenue, potential source of revenue, to be eliminated. So it is important or essential that we maximize the public benefits that we have for people with disabilities. Now, here's a wonderful slide with all the great logos of our California programs, but here's kind of a snapshot of the available benefits. Now you'll see they're broken up into needs-based, entitlement, or other. Needs-based are what we worry about because those tend to have asset tests and income tests. And that means supplemental security income, or SSI, Medi-Cal. I broke out Magi Medi-Cal because that is treated differently. And then IHSS, or in-home supportive services. Those are the needs-based benefits that we really need to focus on. It's important to understand that Social Security Disability Insurance, or SSDI, Medicare, or even childhood disabled beneficiary benefits, we can't screw those up. Those are entitlements, meaning somebody is paid into the system and they have now qualified for that benefit either by becoming disabled or they are a child of a worker and they were disabled and met the requirements for CDB, disabled before age 22, never married, never been able to work. They get a percentage off their parents' work record. Those are entitlements. It doesn't matter if you have $2 million in your bank or $5 million or whatever. As long as you meet the definition of disability and the other requirements, you get those benefits. So it's important when you're planning that you understand this distinction, because sometimes clients come to me and the children only get CDB Medicare. Now they might get Medi-Cal as well. It's possible to have both, but remember, it's critical to understand which benefit program we're dealing with. The other benefit programs, Regional Center, Veteran Benefits, CalFresh, most of those do not have an asset test. Now, I used to put Section 8 in that category, but Section 8 now has an asset test of $100,000. It's indexed for inflation, so I think it's around $103,000 today. But understand that those benefits also have, they don't have an asset test other than Section 8. They might have some income. But again, special needs trust, a lot of times they'll preserve Section 8, but veteran benefits, you have to kind of look at those a little differently. So understand, when you're dealing with public benefits, it's critical to get a full snapshot of what's available, what they're receiving, and then how do we plan for that going forward. And most of the time, I know it's very complicated because the government did us no favors. SSI, SSDI, one letter difference, both managed by the Social Security Administration. The check comes from the same place. Sometimes it's very challenging to find out what benefit you're receiving, but we have a tool for how to fix that, and I'll mention it in just a minute. So I'm going to do real quick on SSI. So supplemental security income is a program for people with disabilities and the aged, but we're here for people with disabilities who are also poor. And there's a resource test and an income test. And when I say income for government benefit purposes, understand that their definition of income is different than what the IRS's definition of income. So for purposes of SSI and Medi-Cal and Section 8, they all have their own definition of income. Some of them are similar, but there are always differences. So again, welcome to my world of entertaining regulations on government programs, which I think one federal judge said, trying to interpret the Social Security Act is like an assault on the English language, which it is. So it's always a fight to figure out what is income and what isn't. So to qualify for SSI, they have to have no more than $2,000 of countable resources. So remember, even though Medi-Cal has eliminated its asset tests, SSI never did. So that asset test has been in place since 1984 and has not changed. The income test for SSI, again, there's earned income, unearned income, deemed income, which is, counting a parent's income as the child's until they're 18. Unearned income is if somebody helps out that SSI recipient with cash, like they might give them $1,000, treat that as unearned income, and it reduces the SSI check dollar for dollar. Earned income, for every $2 you earn, you lose $1 of your SSI check, after some $85 of income disregards. So understand, income is an issue, assets are an issue for SSI. Always have been, apparently always will be, no matter how many times we try to change the law. So what does that give you, SSI? Well, the max for an individual in California, $1,206.94 a month. The federal government pays $967 of that, and California supplements with the rest. One benefit of SSI is you get automatic Medi-Cal. Fantastic, easy way to get Medi-Cal, but you're stuck with following the Social Security rules on how to manage assets. As I mentioned before, it's $2,000, $3,000 for a couple, which again, there's a marriage penalty right there. It's not $4,000, it's $3,000. And also your benefit goes down too. So again, marriage between SSI eligible people, there is a penalty for that. Now, there is one type of income that has changed in the last year, and that's called in-kind support and maintenance, or ISM income. What is that? Well, the government in its infinite wisdom feels like they're giving this unbelievably generous benefit of $967 from the federal government to pay for the food, clothing, shelter of people with disabilities. But hey, if somebody out there on the planet is willing to help them out and give them free food, clothing, or shelter, why should we, the federal government, continue to pay that full amount? So what they do is they penalize that person with a disability if they get, it used to be historically free food, clothing, and shelter, and they reduce the check by 1/3 of the federal benefit rate, which is at $967. And what they define shelter to be are these things on the slide: gas, tax, real property taxes, electricity, water, your normal utilities. So if, here we are in California, you're an SSI recipient, you get $1,206 a month. You're supposed to pay for all your food, clothing, shelter, healthcare, personal care needs, everything out of that check, which we all know is absurd. It's not enough money. There's just not enough there to pay for all of those things. And so some parent or a good Samaritan will say, here, I'm going to give you an extra $1,000 a month. That is unearned income, and that reduces their check dollar for dollar. So they're like, I'm going to be smart and I'm going to pay, I'll just take that $1,000, and instead of giving it to you, I'll pay for your rent and your utilities and your food. Well, historically, that has meant a reduction off that person's check of about, this year, around $342 a month. Okay, that's in-kind support and maintenance, but things have changed. So first off, clothing was removed a long time ago, 20 years ago. So you can now give a jacket to a person with a disability and they won't reduce their check. Thank you, federal government. But they just removed food as of last year, 13 months ago, basically 12 months ago, September 30th, 2024. As of then, you can provide food to an SSI recipient, no penalty. Shelter has changed, rent. Basically, it used to be if you paid the rent of a person on SSI and they didn't pay their fair market rent out of their check, it would reduce that SSI check by 1/3 of the federal benefit rate, or $342.33. So this year. But that has also changed, and I'll talk about that in just a second right now. So if now, today, you pay the rent of somebody on SSI, as long as they pay that 1/3 of the federal benefit rate, so as long as they pay $343 from their SSI check towards their rent, and in California, where are you going to find a place for 343? Let's just say it's $1,400 a month for rent. And as long as the SSI recipient pays 343, a parent, a special needs trust, anyone else can pay the balance and they do not penalize that person. What does that mean? An extra $4,116 this year. And again, over a lifetime, that can really add up into some real money. Again, we're always trying to find new sources of revenue for our people with disabilities, and this is a great way. So, to recap, you can now pay for food, and as long as the person pays about $343 a month of their rent from their SSI check, anyone else can supplement that, no further reduction. I still think, though, the utilities have to be paid for by the person with a disability. So that is really good news for a lot of people because, again, we're always struggling with making the ends meet. There is also a workaround to shelter even. If let's say it's a special needs trust or a parent, if they fund the ABLE account and then the ABLE account person pays their utilities, that does not count as ISM. It's legalized money laundering. Can we say that in a recorded? I'm going to say it. It's legalized money laundering. It's a great way to pay for this and to avoid that penalty for people with disabilities. Okay. So good news on the SSI front. As I mentioned, as long as they're paying for their rent, and as long as they pay $343 a month, then that's excellent news. As I mentioned before, it's very challenging sometimes to figure out if people with disabilities are on SSI or SSDI. Here's how you can find out. You can create a My Social Security account, and you just go through this website, and you submit it, and then you can ask for a benefits verification letter. If you're going to see an attorney, I would encourage you to print this out before you go, because again, this will drive how we do the planning, because we want to make sure you're on SSI or Medi-Cal before we start talking about do you need a special needs trust or not. Okay, so let's shift over to our good friend Medi-Cal. And what is Medi-Cal? Well, that's our healthcare, and it pays for everything if you qualify, and everything being what it does cover. It will cover certain things that no one else will cover, which usually includes in-home supportive services, or IHSS, which is in-home caregiving. Really the only program out there that will pay for that, unless you get a long-term care policy, which are very difficult and expensive to get. Usually Medicare doesn't pay for in-home caregiving much, very little. It also pays for long-term care. It's also, if you have low income, it's usually free full scope. You're not paying co-pays or anything like that. So it's a great program. And in California, we do have a very solid Medi-Cal program. Other states, not so much. There's long waiting lists for certain services. It's not perfect, of course, what is, but it does provide a lot of really good services for Californians. And again, it's been a godsend for many of my clients. Some I don't think would survive without it. So it's always been a challenge to make sure that they receive Medi-Cal. And we don't ever hardly want to question or jeopardize somebody's Medi-Cal eligibility. So where are we today on the asset test? Historically, there has been a $2,000 asset test, just like SSI. But if you can dust off your memories and go to your archives and remember all the way back to 2023, that's when the asset test was actually $130,000. It has only been since January 1st, 2024 that we've had no asset test. So I think, if you think about 2023, what happened? I think the Barbie movie came out. Oppenheimer was also a big movie. Joe Biden was president. So again, real ancient history here. So we're just going back to that. And, in 2023, the asset test was $130,000, which I think the year or two before that, it was, again, historically low $2,000. So we're going back to $130,000 for an individual plus $65,000 for other people in the household. So what does that mean? Well, today, if somebody were to get $150,000, whatever, could be an inheritance or litigation recovery, they can put that money, put it in the bank, and at no impact. They could take that money and give it to their best friend, no impact. Beginning January 1st, that becomes an issue. And we'll talk a little bit about what kind of issue it is, but frankly, we're just going back to what we had to deal with in 2023 and before, okay? So that means special needs trust, CalABLE accounts, their spend downs, personal care contracts, all the really fun little tools we have for planning. What do we mean by Medi-Cal though? It's such a universal name, but look here, there's many different categories of Medi-Cal. The first one there is categorical eligibility. That's if they qualify for SSI, they get that free Medi-Cal. The big issue here is Magi Medi-Cal, because Magi Medi-Cal has never had an asset test and it will not have an asset test going forward. Okay? Keep that in mind. Magi Medi-Cal, no asset test, never has one, never will. The rest of these programs will go to the federal poverty level program, medically needy, long-term Medi-Cal, working disabled, 250% working disabled program. All of those, their asset tests will change from none right now to 130,000 per individual beginning January 1st, 2026. The thing to keep in mind is even in the last 2 years when we've had no asset test, there was always an income test. And that was challenging. It made me actually learn the income rules because, trying to violate $2,000 resource test was super easy. So I never even had to worry about the income rules because the asset test had been violated, before they changed the rules. And so it was very easy for me to do a plan because I knew if they had too much, more than $2,000 of countable resources, that they would not qualify for Medi-Cal. The last couple of years have been more challenging for planners because there's more options. We have something called an OBRA 93 trust under California's definition of that term that allowed us to shield income for eligibility. And we've been using that a ton, which now because of this change in the asset test coming back, I have to go back and unwind some of those OBRA 93 trusts I created, which is a shame because there was no payback. And there was no sole benefit requirement. It was really a nice tool. I'm going to miss the no asset test Medi-Cal. I hope it comes back because I think it is such a boon to people with disabilities. The other benefit of an OBRA 93 versus a special needs trust was that the person with a disability could be in charge of their own money. And I thought that was very valuable. So it's sad that we're going back to a time when asset tests, but I understand the governor was very worried about our budget and, money matters. So this is one way that he's going to balance the budget on the backs of people with disabilities. Okay. So we're going back to what the law was before January 1st, 2024. It's not earth shattering. It's just, we have to dust off those computers and go back to what worked before. As I mentioned, though, keep this in mind. Magi Medi-Cal has no asset test, continues to have no asset test. What is Magi Medi-Cal? Well, other than being really fun to say, Magi, it really stands for the Modified Adjusted Gross Income, or Magi Medi-Cal. And what they do is they look at IRS income, they look at your 1040, and then they add back in some other income that the AGI does not count. And if you're under 138% of the federal poverty limit, which is in California, $1,801 a month, if your income is below that, you get Magi Medi-Cal. Does not matter if you're disabled, pregnant, whatever. You do have to be between the ages, you have to be 18 to 64 years old. You cannot have other health insurance. But again, they look at you, or if you have a household, that those numbers kind of go up. But for an individual, it's 1801. And as long as your income stays below that, you get Magi Medi-Cal, free full scope Medi-Cal. Okay, and that's not changing. Well, let me rephrase. It's not changing under California's law. This is probably where the Trump administration's massive Medi-Cal cuts, our Medicaid cuts, are going to impact the most, is on this program. As you'll see, it's an Affordable Care Act program that was brought in by Obama. So I have a feeling that this is going to be where some significant cuts are going to happen in the future, but today and next year, those don't apply. So Magi Medi-Cal will continue as is, no asset test. All those other categories that I mentioned, those will continue to have an asset test: federal poverty, medically needy, long-term care, working disabled. Okay. So keep that in mind. Magi Medi-Cal does not change. When they turn 65, they're either going to have to qualify for a different kind of Medi-Cal, or hopefully they're on Medicare. So I thought I would take a short summary and kind of go over what are we worried about as far as Medi-Cal estate recovery and payback, because that impacts a lot of people's decisions on what kind of plan they want to do. So as I mentioned before, if somebody receives $100,000 next year, it's not going to matter for Medi-Cal eligibility for any program because, well, let me rephrase, for any program that's not SSI categorical eligibility, because that still has a $2,000 resource test. It's not, if they're not on SSI, but they otherwise qualify for Medi-Cal, 100,000 is not going to make any difference to them. They're going to stay qualified for all Medi-Cal programs. And even if they disqualify themselves from categorical eligibility because they lose their SSI, then they can reapply under federal poverty or medically needy Medi-Cal. So 100,000 really is not an issue in California for Medi-Cal eligibility. But they do have things called estate recovery and S&T payback. What are these things if you're not familiar? So the government, when they passed the rights to do a special needs trust, for example, this is back in 1993, they also at the same time passed a rule that said every state's Medicaid program has to have an estate recovery. And if you're going to use a first party special needs trust, all the assets in that special needs trust have to be subject to payback. Now, what is that? Well, first, let's focus. It's only on Medi-Cal, because I get this question a lot. Does this include my SSI, Section 8, Medicare, SSDI, whatever? No, it's only Medi-Cal. It only applies in certain situations, and let's go over what those are. So first, if a person with a disability who's received any person, I'm sorry, let's say disability, because it actually applies to everyone. If they have Magi Medi-Cal and they're not disabled, they could be subject to estate recovery. Estate recovery is for any Medi-Cal that the person received from age 55 on, or at any age if they were permanently institutionalized, and then they die and they leave no heirs. The exceptions are if they leave a surviving spouse, registered domestic partner, a minor, which they define as under age 21, or a child with a disability, then they're exempt from any of this estate recovery. There's also a hardship waiver, which I don't know how hard your hardship has to be, but I think it has to be awfully hard to get that approved. But again, understand that Medi-Cal has a right to go after the person who died's money if they receive Medi-Cal after age 55 and on. And if they don't have a surviving spouse or minor or a child with a disability, they can go in and say, we want to be paid back. Now, since 2017, before 2017, they could go after everything. They could go after money in revocable living trusts. I think they went after annuities. They went after pretty much everything. But since 2017, they only can go after assets that are subject to probate. And that's a big deal here because, our small estate affidavit is $184,000. Plus there's a whole nother category for houses. And so if they have more than $184,000 and it ends up in a probate, then they can go after the Medi-Cal from post age 55, but only for these services that are identified here. They don't get to go after everything. Like if they pay for IHSS or in-home supportive services, they can't go after that. Okay. So it's a very limited right, but it also can be a significant right. And if you don't properly plan, they could end up costing somebody their assets in if it goes through that probate. So here's what we do is you get a revocable living trust, you use payable on death accounts. All these are probate avoidance techniques that avoid also the estate recovery. It's a little different with the special needs trust and payback on a first party. DHCS has taken the position that they get everything. It doesn't matter. They've taken the position that people with disabilities are getting this unbelievably great deal, which is the term they use, which I don't remember ever anyone asking me about this deal, and having set up thousands of special needs trusts, no one came approach me and said, here's your deal. But I digress. So there's a deal in place, and apparently that deal is you accept the special needs trust. It's not a countable resource. The income earned inside is exempt, but on your death, any Medi-Cal you've received throughout your entire lifetime for everything, IHSS, everything is subject to payback. Now, there's appellate courts on this. The early court, Shuri v. Arnold, said those exceptions to recovery apply, meaning if you leave a child with a disability or a minor child, or it's limited only to recovery for post 55 Medi-Cal, that Shuri v. Arnold says that those exceptions apply. But under Herding and Gonzalez, those appellate courts said, no, those exceptions don't apply. You can go after everything. So somebody with a disability, they could have $500,000 in a special needs trust, first party, and they might leave a child with a disability, but it doesn't matter according to Herding and Gonzalez. Though that child with a disability will get nothing, and if the payback is over $500,000, they'll take it all. Okay, and again, what's really frustrating about this estate recovery payback is how it is not accomplishing the purpose it was designed to. When this was first being bandied about in 1993, they were assuming things like 20 to 30%. This would fund their state Medicaid's programs. But what we found is, like in California, 0.001% of all payback and estate recovery, that's how much it impacted the state budget. But what it does to families is devastating. It really punishes poor families. And because, again, a lot of times where people with disabilities, their child might get a litigation recovery. It's put into a special needs trust. Mom or dad has quit their job to care for that loved one with special needs, which means they're not paying into their own retirement. They're not paying into Medicare. And when that child dies and the payback takes the entire amount of funds, that adult now, who's oftentimes near or at retirement, has no money for themselves. Nothing. No retirement, no built up. And so again, I've seen it time and time again where this has punished people, and it's a very unfair system. And you'll see there's an article here about it. And I know our national NALA is fighting to try to rescind this program, but right now it is the law of the United States. I'm on my soapbox now. I'll get off. Let's talk about best practices. We're down to our last few minutes here. And I know there'll probably be some questions here, and I don't know if I'm going to have enough time to get to them. So if you do have questions, my email is on the slides. So feel free to reach out and email me your questions. I will do my best to respond. Understand that I am incredibly busy right now, but again, will take some time out to answer as many questions as I can. So, feel free to reach out. And I'll give you some tools for how to keep current with some of these changes that are occurring at the end here. But what do we do? Well, we have an asset test coming, but remember the third-party special needs trust, that never changed, even with an asset test or without an asset test, because at the end of the day, we're setting up trusts. Mom and dad are setting up a trust because oftentimes, even if the person with a disability won't be impacted for public benefits, they may not be able to manage that level of wealth. So my third party does not change because the asset test changed. What does change with the first party? That means if the person with them, gets money, the real change is if they get, $150,000 or more of cash. I would normally put them into an OBRA 93 trust today. I'll just be putting them into a first party special needs trust January 1st, 2026 and beyond. Or if they're like, if it's 150,000, I'd probably use an ABLE account and maybe do a spend down and keep them under the 130, right? It's just a tool. It's just one more factor in what we're trying to decide how to plan for that person with a disability. So we just want to make sure that if, they're getting significant wealth, we can't use the over 93 trust anymore. We have to use the D4A or a pooled SNT to manage those funds and then subject everything to payback and sole benefit. Maybe someday we can go back to over 93 where there's none of that. But that's what's changing in 2026 is we just go back to how things were back before January 1st, 2024. We want to coordinate those benefits. Again, SSI has always had a $2,000 asset test. And while 1206.94 does not seem like a lot of money to care for someone, over a lifetime, it is a significant benefit. There's a cost of living adjustment each year. And I had a financial advisor help me run the numbers. And for an 18-year-old, it's about a $2 to $3 million lifetime benefit to try to replace that revenue. So it is not an insignificant benefit. So it's important to try to keep, like I said, as many sources of income as we can. It's always important to choose the right trustee and family trustees. Again, I find in special needs trusts, I try to convince them to use California licensed private professional fiduciaries and put family members on a trust advisory committee because the rules are tricky. Because remember, these public benefit rules are an assault on the English language, and you have to really dig into them to make sure we're not going to screw things up with a special needs trust. Does that mean it's impossible for a family member to be trustee? No, there's tools for that. So it's important, though, that we select the right trustee. For family members, or professionals, advise your clients or family members to get a memorandum of intent. Hopefully, use our free service to figure out how to do it. Because again, I think it's one of the most critical documents that they can use. It also helps them kind of crystallize their thinking a little bit more in what expectations do they have for the exceptional life that they want to leave their loved one with special needs. It gives them some tools to think about in the future. And again, don't do it all at once. Take it in steps. Because again, it can be quite an overwhelming process. There is a newsletter here. If you go to our website, you can use the QR code to do that. And that will get you, what we do is we keep people abreast of all the changes like that food being removed from ISM, shelter being modified, and then this asset test. And this is a book I have. My 4th edition is coming out in January of 2026. And I'm taking into account the reinstatement of the asset test. We have a great McGee case. So this is a completely updated Administering California Special Needs Trust. It will be available in January. If you're going to administer one of these, I think my page count is up to 700 or 800 pages. So it's quite extensive. And like I said, it can be complicated. And then finally, I just wanted to let people know that we do run a Napa symposium called the Special Needs Planning Symposium. It's our 10th year. We have a fundamentals day. And we have a day of Friday and Saturday that will be more of intermediate and advanced planning for people with disabilities. Maura is going to be teaching a little bit for one of our sessions. So again, it's an excellent resource if you want to get the most up-to-date information on special needs planning. So with that, it looks like I finished with 1 minute for questions.
You made it right to the finish line, Kevin. What a wonderful presentation. I always appreciate how this is not a simple topic. It's not easy to understand, but I really appreciate the effort that you take to explain it in a way that is a lot more digestible because this is very overwhelming. So do you have time for 2 questions now?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we have a question about CalABLE. If a parent uses part of a CalABLE account, part of the funds in a CalABLE account for their from their minor child's account, can they use it to contribute towards purchasing a family home, such as a down payment? Would that be a qualifying expense?
I think it would be, except I think then the child has to own a piece of that home. Which they probably can, because I didn't talk about it, but primary residence is an exempt resource. For SSI purposes, it can be of any value. Right now, under current Medi-Cal regulations, it can be of any value, but that may change in the upcoming years. There might be a cap on that. But right now, yeah. I think you do need, though, to give them a percentage interest in the home.
And so the follow-up question, and this had to do with an adult child, but it sounds like similarly for minor child, that one of it would be the requirement that their name would have to be on title or deed.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, when I say requirement, I don't think it's a requirement. I think that it could be subject to attack by somebody because it could be seen as a divestment of their money or theft of their money to buy a house, especially if the person doesn't live there. Like you use the money and then they live there for like a month and then they leave.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden the money's gone. So again, it's not a legal requirement. I'm just saying as an attorney, I would advise my client to give them a percentage to protect them in the future. Because again, it's their money and it shouldn't be just spent on somebody else, even if it's family. But if they live there and all that, I think there might be a creative way to not give them a percentage of the house and maybe just give them a life estate to live there for the rest of their life. So there's other options.
Okay. This is a question related to the in-kind support under SSI. If an SSI recipient living with their daughter, both are renting the apartment, is not paying her fair share of rent, but is paying a rent greater than the PMV, would she be charged as receiving ISN?
That's the beauty of it. No. So she won't get charged. It used to be, yes, prior to September 30th, 2024, that would have been a penalty. Under current regulations, it's not. Try to explain that to your local Social Security worker, though. They're not up to speed on this. So you might need to bring in the regulation. I have a copy of it. So you might need to bring that in with you because a lot of times they are not aware that is the truth anymore or that's changed.
Okay. Kevin, thank you so much for today's presentation. We really appreciate it. You had really great information for many of us that are working with individuals that are worried not only about the asset limit return in 2026, but a lot of folks today work with people that receive SSI, or we have some consumers on today's call as well. So I just want to thank you for your time and for all the work that you do both in your legal practice and, to contribute to the field of legal services that are providing free services for individuals that can't afford private estate planners.
Yeah, just that's why the books are out there because again, I've done many consumer seminars. I tell people my fees and half the room's fine, half the room's like, oh, too much. So that's what the NOLO Press and all the books are for.
Okay. Well, thank you so much again, Kevin. Kevin will be attending this year's Canner Elder Law Conference. If you haven't already signed up, our Elder Law Conference is in Monterey in November. So we're doing an exchange program, Kevin and I, for the year ahead. But thank you again for your time. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope you found the information valuable. And we look forward to giving you additional training in the future. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.